Thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here today in these important historical celebrations of the 125th anniversary of the Homestead workers and the struggle for freedom, for liberty, for benefits for all the workers and the working class in the United States of America and in all of North America. I want to start by thanking the Battle of Homestead Foundation, especially to John Herr and Lou, not only for this invitation, but for the important work you are doing to keep the history of the labor movement alive. And I especially want to thank Steffi Domike for all of her assistance, which made it possible for me to be here today. I also want to recognize the great legacy of Bernard Kleinman, the late General Counsel of the United Steelworkers, to whom this lecture series is a continuing tribute. Today, we are here to honor the memory of the courageous men and women who 125 years ago took history in their hands and bravely stood up to the forces of radical and savage capitalism that was rapidly transforming industrial production, stripping workers of their rights in the name of market-driven efficiency and increased profitability. Their act of resistance gave birth, after many more battles, to the modern industrial trade union movement. Spearheaded by the United Steelworkers and, in a real sense, to industrial, political, and social democracy, and for workers set standards for some degree of economic justice. But as we know, capitalism doesn't rest. Today, a new global class of plutocratic billionaires heading multinational banks and corporations is again revolutionizing the means of production and attempting to destroy workers' organizations and opportunities for real wages advances. These global robber barons have forced workers in countries around the world to compete with each other on the price of labor, and have entrenched their power through so-called free trade agreements like NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact, or TPP. I just want to give an example that what has happened after the NAFTA agreement 23 years later from when it was signed. In Mexico, wages were at that time, 23 years ago, 5 times above those in China. Today's Mexico minimum wages are about 40% lower than in China. This is the result of a policy that was implemented through the NAFTA agreement, and that has created a lot of problems for the working class, not only of North America, but also of Mexico. Beyond wage differences and disparities, in Mexico we face challenging and violent conditions today, as in some ways resemble those endured by the Homestead workers in 1892. While our economy is being transformed by world-class production techniques in the automotive, the steel, mining, and other sectors, many industrial workers still encounter almost feudal, if not medieval, conditions on the shop floor. In most workplaces, management control is absolute and unquestionable, and is reinforced by employer-dominated protection unions and the state authorities who are controlled and often bought off by the factory owners. As a result, Mexican manufacturing workers today earn about 15% of what of what the US counterparts earn. The same as in the 1994 when the NAFTA was, the same as in 1994 when NAFTA was implemented. This wage gap means that we can't afford to buy the products we make for export. And we certainly can't afford goods exported from the US and other parts of the world. The wage gap has driven millions of Mexicans to emigrate in search of decent work opportunities. And of course, Mexico has been a magnet for American companies who shut down factories here and relocate in Mexico. So as US jobs evaporate and Mexican wages suffer, both Mexican workers and US workers lose. This wage gap is not an accident. For the past 50 years, the government and the billionaires club that controls the Mexican economy have enforced a systematic policy of keeping wages low and workers poor to attract foreign investment. A key part of this policy is the use of protection unions, which are the employer-dominated labor organizations that sign contracts with employers, often without the knowledge of the workers, and sometimes even before the plant is open. The protection contract is the dominant model designated to exploit workers, to keep wages low, and attract foreign investment. This impacts the lives of 90% of the workers in these so-called unions. My union, Los Mineros, is one of the few democratic unions in Mexico that has fought back against the protection contract system. We are the resistance to the dominant model of exploitation. Our members and their families have paid a heavy price for this. The protection contracts are protection for the companies. Let me explain a little bit more about that. And Mexico has characterized in the last 30 years since a huge process of privatization of public companies went into private hands. They create this system of protection contracts in which workers are not aware of what if they have a collective bargaining agreement or no. They cannot elect their leaders. They cannot choose the union they belong. So it's a system of corruption in which the companies and labor leaders, so-called pseudo-labor leaders, make an agreement at the back of the workers. And the biggest trade union organizations of Mexico, like the CTM, the Confederation of Workers of Mexico, another confederation, the CROC, and another one, CTC, these three biggest organizations, what are institutional official organizations, own, we say own because it's what they own, 90% of these protection contracts. We have criticized and demanded change to this labor policy that exploits workers and create these problems of attracting foreign investment because of the low wages in Mexico. We, Los Mineros, in the Mine and the Steelworkers Union, fight for a completely different policy. And we will be very successful in spite of all these attacks and campaigns, smear campaigns that we have received against us. We have got, in the last 10 years, the highest wage and benefit increases for our workers, 3 and 4 times above the national average of the rest of the unions in Mexico. We have been able to organize thousands of new workers to our union, but we have always the opposition of the government and companies because they think that we are too radical. But we are radical in defending workers' rights and human rights. And of course, we will continue doing so. But we have paid, as I said, a heavy price for that. I wrote a book 3 years ago, which is called Collapse of Dignity. I told in this book the story of a mine disaster at a group of Mexicans coal mine at Pasta de Conchos in the north of Mexico, where 65 miners died in an explosion on February 19, 2006. And only 2 bodies out of those 65 have been recovered. We still have today 63 bodies abandoned at the bottom of the mine. Because I would not be silent in denouncing the company's industrial homicide, this is what they commit, an industrial homicide, out of criminal negligence and irresponsibility. And because our union stood up in unity against the obvious government collusion with this mining company, the offices of our union were raided. Legal recognition of our leaders was withdrawn. Unfounded criminal charges were brought against me and other union leaders, some of whom were jailed for no reason as political prisoners. And I had no choice but to leave Mexico after my family, and I received repeated death threats. For those who don't know, I've been living in Canada for the last 11 years now. On exile, presiding the union from Canada. I'm a weird case that I continue presiding the union. I've been reelected 6 times unanimously on different conventions during the last 11 years. Out of the loyalty of the members, and we have continued on this struggle. But it has been a very tough struggle as a result of this political persecution against me and the union leaders and the workers of Los Mineros in Mexico. To protest these attacks, our members at the mines operated by Grupo Mexico, which is the biggest mining group of Mexico, it's a multinational company, headed by the billionaire named Germán Larrea, who is Mexico's answer, I would say, to John D. Rockefeller. And sadly, only the second richest man in Mexico with a lowly net worth of $17 billion. And we went on to strike on July 30th, 2007. In all the mines and facilities of this company. This month will mark the 10th anniversary on the 30th of July of these strikes, which have been continued in 3 of the local mines, despite brutal repression, and have resulted in more than 100 dead workers, most killed during acts of violence. We also faced repression on the steel mill in Lázaro Cárdenas, Michoacán, where 2 of our members were killed during a strike on April 20, 2006, and more than 100 also were seriously injured. And at the Cananea copper mine, which is the biggest copper mine, and it's claimed to be the 3rd largest copper mine in the world, when we went on to strike, the mine owners shamelessly substituted cheap laborers, even bringing workers from Central America, whom they exploited to work the mines. They didn't want to continue working with the members of our union, Los Mineros. And even they dared to bring people from Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, and many others, just to pay low wages. This is what really explains why so many American companies, Canadian companies, and many others have been moving to Mexico. It's an unjust policy for the workers of Mexico. It's a wrong policy that we have been criticizing very strongly against the Mexican government. At AMSA, Altos Hornos de Mexico is the biggest, or one of the biggest steel producers of Mexico, another major steel producer. We have fought a long battle against the company's attempt to install a puppet union. The federal and state authorities have refused to protect the workers. And just 2 weeks ago, members of our union from this company, AMSA, in La Perla mine, were fired on by unknown gunmen, and 5 workers were wounded. We have also, against this company, have long fights in other mines, recently in Hercules in the north of Mexico in the state of Coahuila, where the company installed, with the complicity of the government, a puppet union to serve their interests. They imposed these so-called traitors to the union, and they fired the leaders who were in charge and elected freely and democratically by the workers. And the government didn't react. We complained, we launched protests all over Mexico, and they still have control of this mine through these puppets. And we also have another mine with them, Cerro del Mercado in the state of Durango. It's an iron ore mine of the same group that it's still now is for almost 2 months. I think tomorrow will be 2 months of this strike. And the company has threatened the workers to shut down the mine, to fire all of them. If they don't accept that, 125 workers are going to be fired and substituted by these kind of gangs and traitors to the union that they want to impose. We have resisted and we will continue resisting on this mine. These are the kind of attacks that we receive all the time. Unfortunately, the corruption of the Mexican government and the collusion with all these companies has been increasing in the last years. And probably they feel today stronger in a stronger position because of what is happening in the world today, that right-wing governments, conservative governments, are attacking the labor movement. Fortunately, the Mexican mine and steel workers have not been alone in this fight. In the same way that John L. Lewis and the United Mine Workers supported industrial organizing in the US, auto and steel industries in the 1930s, for nearly 2 decades. Leo Girard and the United Steelworkers have been standing with Los Mineros, our union, in a fight to construct a North American industrial union. In fact, in 2005, Leo Girard and I signed a strategic alliance between the United Steelworkers and Los Mineros because we know that solidarity works, and that we said at that moment that globalization was going to bring benefits for the companies and more power to the companies to exploit workers all over, so that we should create our own efforts to globalize our strategies and actions as well. We, the working class, and we signed this strategic alliance in 2005, which helped us very much when these attacks and conflicts began in 2006 against Los Mineros. Our fight is far from over, and only history can give us a verdict. But it is important for many reasons. First, as I already explained, our members and the steel workers in the US and Canada share a common interest in narrowing the wage gap with Mexico. That gap can be closed only one of 2 ways: by pushing US and Canadian wages down, or by raising Mexican wages up. If you ask the workers to vote, there is no contest. Higher wages benefit all workers and the broader company. When workers have more spending power, it translates into more demand, more growth, and more jobs. This is what we have been fighting for in our union, and this is we have been successful, but unfortunately we are only one of the few democratic unions in Mexico who really fight to defend and protect workers' rights. Second, we have many common employers. Steel companies such as ArcelorMittal, Grupo CH, which owns Republic Steel, and Tenaris, mining companies such as Goldcorp, Grupo Mexico, which own Azarco, and Hecla Mining, and manufacturing companies such as ASFK and Dana, which make transportation equipment. We only benefit as we influence companies together to favor shared interests of workers and support for collective bargaining. Third, we share a common history and heritage. The Cananea mine where the Mexican Revolution started in 1906, was owned by ASARCO. It was a similar strike that the mine workers of Cananea had in the north of Mexico. The 1st of June of 1906, and they used, of course, the company at that time was owned by an American capitalist who brought the Rangers from the United States. The Mexican government allowed for that, and they repressed the workers, and 27 of our members were killed at that time. So we had a history also, and this create the basis, the intellectual basis, and the political conditions for the Mexican Revolution, which started in 1910, 4 years later, after this repression and assassination of our members in the Cananea copper mine. And this company, which was owned by ASARCO, the American Smelting and Refining Company, which in those days belonged to the Guggenheim family. Today, ASARCO's properties in Arizona and Texas are owned by Grupo Mexico, the same multinational company, the biggest mining group of Mexico, and the owner of this company, as I said, is the second richest man in Mexico. And this company treats U.S. workers in Arizona and Texas almost as badly as its workers in Mexico. Many of the USW members at ASARCO mines in Arizona are descendants from Mexican families, and there is a long history of cross-border collaboration. Likewise, many Mexican workers immigrated to Northwest Indiana and Chicago in the 1920s, where they helped build the steel industry. One of the two strikers bearing American flags who led the march to the gate of the Republic Steel on May 30, 1937, during the Memorial Day Massacre, was an undocumented Mexican named Max Guzman. As a Mexican and as a trade union leader who cares deeply for his American brothers and sisters, I can tell you that there is no wall that can divide us from our shared fight for dignity. We share common values and principles as national industrial unions. We believe that fair wages are a right of all workers. We believe that democracy is just as important in the workplace as in the polling place. We believe that an injury against one is an injury to all. We believe that the right to strike and the right to collective bargaining are some of the sacred pillars of our legacy as workers, and the legacy that Homestead represents in our collective imagination. We do not fight for our interests. If we don't fight for our interests, who will fight for us? Given the violent labor context in Mexico, it is really no surprise that my dear and respected friend Leo Gerard and the USW helped me and my family escape political persecution and find a safe home in Canada. It is not surprise that for the past 9 years, more than 100 steel workers have marched every year in Lázaro Cárdenas to commemorate the 2 mineros who were murdered by the police in 2006 steel strike. It is not surprise that the United Steelworkers has helped us establish a national women's program we call Mineras de Acero, or Women of Steel, to fulfill our promise of equality and justice for everyone. And it is no surprise that when the USW rallied in Indianapolis against carrier decisions to close its plant and move to work to Mexico, a member of the executive committee, the National Executive Committee of Los Mineros, addressed the rally to demand that the company keep the jobs in the US. That is what international solidarity is all about. Let me finish by talking about the renegotiation of NAFTA, the free trade agreement, which is one of the biggest political issues facing both US and Mexico over the next year, and Canada, of course, too. Despite all the attempts by right-wing politicians to divide and antagonize the US and the Mexican workers, our unions have worked together to advance some key demands. First, our governments should work together to protect North American manufacturing industry against unfair competition from China, especially by maintaining or increasing rules of origin. Second, we demand transparency and accountability in the negotiations and oppose the investor-state dispute settlement and oppose this investor-state dispute settlement process, which put workers' rights, public health, and safety and environmental protection in the hands of secret tribunals. Third, the minimum wage in Mexico must be increased. We could start, and let me tell you that by our struggle for increased workers' wages and benefits, indirectly we have also worked to help the United Steelworkers and many other unions to prevent that the companies move to Mexico. We are not against creating jobs, but not jobs based on exploitation of the labor force in Mexico. We don't want that. We want to have the same wage and benefits that you have here. We work on the same basis and conditions. We have been fighting for that all our lives, and we will continue to do so. And it's an indirect way of trying to collaborate. But we're, as I said, only one of the few unions who do that in Mexico. So we have to change this labor policy of the government, which is wrong, and is going to a failure, because sooner or later we will have social problems and social unrest as well. So the minimum wage in Mexico must be increased. We could start by doubling it from the current $4 a day. And the average, not our wages are much higher than those, the wages of los mineros. And the fundamental rights of workers to organize and bargain must be strengthened. Under international pressure, Mexico passed some important labor reforms to the Constitution last year to weaken the power of employer-dominated protection unions, to set up a new system of labor courts. But these reforms have already been undermined by a corrupt alliance of businessmen, corrupt union leaders, and the right-wing politicians, even before they are put into place. The global trade union movement and democratic leaders in the US Congress have demanded that Mexico raise their wages and strengthen the rights of its workers, same as we have been demanding and fighting for. Today, as renegotiations of NAFTA progress, we are beginning to reset our expectations for the impact on industries from sugar to steel, and with more uncertainty and change to come. I would just like to make a break to make a comment, because recently, in the last few weeks, the renegotiations of the NAFTA agreement began on the sugar industry. Mexico is an exporter, is a country which exports a lot of refined sugar to the United States. And the US government threat the Mexican exporters to impose a tariff of 30 or 40% for their exports if they don't stop exporting refined sugar to Mexico, to United States. Finally, they made an agreement in which Mexico is allowed to export without this imposed tariff of 30 or 40% on raw sugar. But Mexico cannot export any more refined sugar to the United States. This is something that probably will happen in steel and in many other industries if the NAFTA agreement is renegotiated. Mexico is in a weaker position to defend and protect the rights of the people, even to defend and protect the industry interests in Mexico. I don't know if you read or watched a couple of days ago during the G20 meeting in Hamburg, in Germany. There was a private meeting between the President of the United States and the President of Mexico. And both of them were with the teams, their secretaries of state, and suddenly one journalist, and the two of them were sitting on the front of this meeting room. And one of them asked the President of the United States, "Are you still thinking that you are going to build a wall and that Mexico is going to pay for that?" And he looked at the President of Mexico and he said, "Absolutely." And the President of Mexico kept quiet. I said, wow. I mean, this is something that we, of course, criticize so much, of the weakness of the Mexican government. He should have more dignity and honorability to defend that. I mean, we are a sovereign nation like many other ones. But anyway, this has happened 2 days ago during these meetings in the G20 in Germany. Just to express how things are happening there. But so we must stay vigilant and aware that our rights as trade unionists are under increased pressure. Our livelihoods more threatened than ever, and the global competition and dumping in steel from China and other commodities are only growing each day, with each day. No one wants to see more needless violence like that of Homestead or what we experienced in Mexico. We all want to see a positive revolution, a transformation of thinking and action, models and systems that are sustainable for growth and shared prosperity for all. This was the theme of my last book, which is called Before the Next Revolution. And I brought a few copies here for you to know. It was just published in English 3 months ago, less than 3 months ago. And what I'm saying and what I believe is that there are better ways to grow our economy, not to the detriment of humanity or to enhance our collective well-being. This is a revolution that I'm proposing of the ideas of transformation. It's not a violent revolution, it's not a blood revolution, it's something that we have to change and transform the models of economic development and exploitation that we have today. And it's not only for Mexico, it's valid for everywhere, wherever exploitation exists. So in closing, I want to thank you for your kind invitation. It's really a privilege and an honor for me to be here on behalf of my trade union, my colleagues, Los Mineros from Mexico, and my family. Thank you very much for inviting me. We, Los Mineros, are a strong and proud union. We continue the legacy of the Homestead strike. We must reinforce our strategies and our commitment to solidarity. We must continue to work together toward common goals of justice, respect, dignity, and honoring those who have fallen in the fight for social and economic justice. It is us who must lead this fight. It is us who must work relentlessly to protect the values, livelihoods, and futures of the working and middle classes, not just here, but everywhere people are vulnerable in the world today. Thank you very much for your invitation. Thank you very much for being here.